So I call to order the October 28th Ad Hoc Attendance Boundaries Committee meeting. We do we don't have any, do we have anybody in the online?
Not as of now.
Okay, well,
a lot of wonderful people.
if we do, that Ms. Phillips gave me a wonderful script. So if we do have anybody that joins on the chat, click the button. But for the people that are in attendance, and we've got a room full, we've never been this full before, but we do our comments a little differently. So if you do, while we're having a discussion, want to comment, if you just wouldn't mind raising your hand in the moment, then we will take conversation as it happens. So let's just kind of go around the room. I want to start with the board members, introduce who's here, and then we'll pick it up and see who's in the room for us today. I am Kareem Moffitt.
Carol Jones, board member.
Eve Bolton, board member.
Let's start with staff.
Good afternoon. I'm Pam Davis, Chief of Staff.
Jeremy Gollihue, Chief Information Officer.
Craig Rosen, parent, LSDMC at Spencer Center.
Adeline Hall, Director of School Center Neighborhood Development with the Community Learning Center Institute.
Tracy Power, Director of Parent Programming and Partnerships, Community Learning Center Institute.
Amy Kaufman, LSDMC Parent Rep from PRM.
Hi, Sharon Cheney, Gulf Manor Rep at PRM LSDMC.
Rob Wilson, Technician.
Phyllis Davis, the Board's Administrative Assistant.
I am Erin Fay, and I'm a parent of a child at Walnut Hills High School.
Allison Goodman, I have a student at SCPA and 2 at PRM.
Hello everyone, my name is Kyle Reiser. I'm the LSDMC at Roll Hill Elementary and serve on the East Westwood Community Council.
Wow, we've got a great diverse group in here today. I love it. So, does everyone have a copy of the agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So today, let's start with our first topic, provide a list of what schools are or are not magnet schools, and then how those schools are designated and what percentage of students live or do not live in those neighborhoods. So I'm thinking, Jeremy, is that you?
I think so.
I think it is.
I hope
We'll be starting the show today.
Okay.
So real quick before we jump into that, you have it in your packets today. I know this didn't make it on the agenda, but it's something that had been discussed around the preschool and kindergarten population predictors. It's something we've talked about a couple of times. So I put this together. This shows what the current census data shows in terms of the breakdown of under 18 community members within the Cincinnati area, and then our 4-year average enrollment projections as to what our normal preschool and kindergarten projections would be. This is in alignment with as of October 15th this year and includes the last 3 years. So that's where our average would stand right now over a 4-year period. And based on that population, that's about normal what we would expect based on the population trend over that 4-year period. So just wanted to throw that in since it had been a discussion, a topic of discussion.
We did talk about that. For those that are just joining us, we talked about just a small recap. Can't we predict how many preschoolers are coming? You know, we know the data. They're existing. They're here. So how can we predict what our enrollment would be for preschool and kindergarten in the future based on births? So Jeremy did that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep. Next, you have the magnet enrollment schedule summary, just as a reminder, because we've been talking about that a lot, especially around the magnet schools. So just to keep that at the front of your availability. And then we'll get to the actual question. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
So what we have is the list of this list represents all of the schools that are currently designated as a magnet school in the magnet lottery. This is independent of whether they're on the website as an advertisement or anything else. This is truly the master list of the schools that are in the magnet lottery, meaning that you can enroll to that school through the lottery process. The ones that we have primarily been looking at and talking about and doing a lot of investigation on with this committee and with the administration are the top 7 schools. The 6 in blue represent schools that were traditionally had a college prep designation for their upper grades, and we've discussed, to some degree that program has been deprecated for a period of time, and these schools have remained in the magnet status without necessarily having those grades in that program. The next two with Silverton and Woodford are both, again, in a similar situation with the Paideia designation it had at one time, but is no longer there. And then the seventh one being Roberts, that I think bears a little bit more description just because, unlike Woodford and Silverton, it necessarily wasn't just the name of Roberts Paideia, but it was a Paideia Learning Center designation. So across those, we've been doing a lot more investigation. The superintendent has asked us to look into some very specific data sets around her proposal for a final recommendation that'll be upcoming, including we've looked at what the lottery enrollment numbers look like for each of these schools over a short history, and we're looking at deeper history. For example, for the first 6 schools this year, there were 30 students approximately that applied, were accepted, and were enrolled in those schools through the lottery magnet or the magnet lottery process. If you add in Roberts, that number goes to 43 students. So it is a significant portion of students still currently that are enrolling in these schools through the magnet process. And so we're looking at more historical view on that as part of her recommendation, as well as what the transportation impacts would be with the change from necessarily a magnet designation, as well as the evaluation, as we've talked about, the ongoing program audits that may necessitate or may be part of a decision that these schools would or would not be a future magnet for a different program and what the other programs across that district or the region offers. So any questions on that?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
You can go first.
I have some questions since they're indecisive.
No, I'm not indecisive, but I saw her hand before mine. I just want to be clear. I think I got this right. So the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are schools that have a designation based on sort of a program philosophy or something, or focus, emphasis, and they are still taking our students when they are enrolling. They're still enrolling in the magnet lottery, even though they don't necessarily have the designation.
Correct. The programs that qualify them for that designation are no longer necessarily happening at those schools, as they've been defined currently, either the Paideia or the college prep.
So technically they're neighborhoods.
That was my next question.
And that goes a little bit deeper into, of those first 6, all of those schools, you'll see Woodford and Roberts with the asterisk to the left. All of those schools do currently have a neighborhood boundary that's been designated for them. And subsequent here in a moment, we'll look at what that actual boundary has in terms of the number of students attending those schools versus what boundary they live in. But the Woodford and Roberts academies do not have a current boundary that has been designated. And those two do currently operate within the boundary of another neighborhood school. So they're going to be the biggest challenges in terms of impacts for changing them out of a magnet status, potentially.
Board Member Bolton?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for this. If I could ask, did you say 30 students?
Across the first 6. And then once you add Roberts, it goes to 43.
So we're in a school district with 35,000 or 36,000. We're making all these arrangements for 30 kids in 6 buildings, right? That's allegedly because there's somehow a magnet. Okay.
So I would offer clarity just that is the number of students that were enrolled at the school this year through the lottery. However, when we look at those schools, and I have a couple of maps we can look at, you'll see that over time, the enrollment of the school has spread out across a region. So necessarily, it wouldn't just be that 30 or saying that we wouldn't be taking another magnet lottery class next year. It wouldn't necessarily just be those 30 that would be changing for their enrollment trend. It would be across their entire student body coming in, obviously, outside of the grandfather.
Right, and I would assume, and we've said before, any change that we make is going to take 1, 2, or 3 years, because these kids are going to be grandfathered in some way because their families and kids have made a choice. So I think that's reasonable. So I don't get concerned about phasing this in, but if I might, I'm curious too. Part of it is the college prep lure, which really is not the case because we have said should be doing, based upon even the Walnut results in all of our neighborhoods, there should be some sort of preparatory effort in all of our neighborhood schools. So that shouldn't be a single amount. I am interested, if very quickly, on the Spencer and the Cheviot schools, because part of the program at Cheviot is that idea of the gifted or near gifted, or however we've done it. And we started to find out that many of our kids weren't being identified, and we literally created both the Cheviot program and then also, obviously, Spencer. It seems to me that there's at least the program at Cheviot and the whole school at Spencer makes some sense. And then once you start taking away the Montessori's, which really it's a Montessori system, actually, PK 12, that's a whole nother system rather than, let's say, a magnet school. It really shouldn't be identified. I know there's enrollment kind of counts as towards the enrollment piece, or enrollment counts to kind of make them magnets and the sign up. But after you do that, there's really not very many magnets. I mean, you have at least 3, maybe 4 international kind of schools. You have all the Montessori's. But then going down the list, we're counting Digital Academy as a magnet, College Hill Academy, Fairview. Of course, LEAP might be considered international, and then I'll rush through this a little bit. And then you have the Montessori's, and then we don't have listed on here Walnut. If we don't have Walnut listed, why do we have School for the Creative and Performing Arts listed?
I was going to ask because it didn't seem very fair to me.
Yeah.
Is that because of how they enroll for their kindergarten through 3rd grade? Their artistic audition start at 4th grade.
That could be the reason, but it makes it also exceptional. So it really would be SCPA would really be those primary grades you're suggesting, rather than that. So yeah, but I mean, I don't know that it should be on the list as such as a magnet. It's an exceptionally exclusive admittance to that one.
It's on the list because it's a lottery. Not everybody gets in, but it's the criteria and the process that I think distinguishes it from. Same with Walnut. It's the process that.
And then we probably, if that's the case, where is Walnut on that?
Yeah.
Because it's not lottery; it's by test. But 4 through 12, so is SCPA. It's not a lottery as such. But so that's just my question. The only one I'm still questioning about is William Howard Taft Elementary. It's supposed to be some kind of STEM. I think we should investigate whether or not it is, saying that to the administration.
Yeah.
Because it's mostly a neighborhood school.
Well, unfortunately, that's kind of the problem we find ourselves in, is some of these are mostly neighborhoods, but their designation, like College Hill was College Hill was College Hill Prep or something like that.
Yeah, it used to be fundamental, and now it's not. So it probably
we have some work to do. Does anyone have any questions about so far? Oh wow. Okay. Yes. Ladies first.
It was my understanding that the previous superintendent had struck the Paideia designation for Roberts because of the IB process that Roberts is going through. So that Roberts would still maintain its magnet status with the IB in International Baccalaureate work that they're doing in conjunction with Thader Junior High, Junior High, High School, in that work that's being done.
I believe that's correct. As the IB proceeds in the future.
I believe that is correct, and that is part of, as we kind of added it as a potential 7th for further evaluation.
Right.
Because under the criteria we were looking at specifically with the loss of the college prep and the Paideia qualification specifically, those are the schools we identified that had that condition. But there may be other conditions to consider, and that was one that has come up for Roberts as to why it could justify it being a magnet moving forward still outside of just these criteria.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I know that legislatively language has changed at the state regarding classifications of schools. And so I'm curious if how we classify, whether it's a magnet or a STEM. I know that the word STEM and that classification gives other opportunities for students at that school, whether it's athletics or other scholarships. So I'm curious if there was a dive into the current language and where we align and where we might not as a district.
I'll take that one. The conversations that we're having now are those preliminary audit conversations to really assess what we have. I think when you heard Mr. Gallahue earlier speaking about just the current designations that we historically as a district have compared to the programming that's actually going on in the school, we're trying to audit that to assess what we have, because then, to your point about the legislative guidelines, we definitely want to make sure we're in bounds when it comes to that particular language. So this is like the preliminary. We're benefiting just from the historical, the history in the room, where people are sharing, just like you added about, the previous superintendent's guidance around that. So that is in the line. We just need to get this initial preliminary conversation out of the way.
So just to remind everybody, this was we are going to have a report, I believe, in December of a complete audit of all of our schools and their designation. And I believe at that time, some recommendations, or at least we'll be able to go over the audit. So this was, Member Bolton wanted some information preliminarily. So this was kind of the first step with that.
And also the timeline for lottery, the first page that Jeremy shared with us, we're going to lose another year if we wait too long.
Right.
So I think that's part of the concern, because we've sat about Silverton and about Woodford. We've been on that for 5 years. And it started with the discussion of PRM, and PRM, when it was decided by the board and the administration, we would expand their building and keep their boundary lines the same. But we had under enrollment in both Silverton and also in Woodford as two magnets. And so it's already been suggested years before about moving them to the neighborhood, like, Woodford being Kennedy Heights or what have you. So that timeline is very important, that we don't commit ourselves to another year of transportation problems and also inauthentic programming.
And if I may add just one more thing, this is all in the staging for recruitment and programming, where we have designated programs in our buildings that are authentic across all grade levels. It allows us to attract those who might not have come to us or may not be aware of the programming that continues through the grade band. And so the transportation piece, it impacts that, because it allows us as a district to determine how we are making that connectivity when it comes to transporting our kids to the programming that they're eligible for if transportation is tied to that. So it's the beginnings of an incredible plan, as I see it, in terms of what CPS has to offer.
Organizing our greatness is what I think of it is. So does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I think you're still up.
Yeah,
1 mile walk distance for elementary schools.
Well, actually, for the second part of the first question,
come on.
there's a little bit more data there if you're
great.
Really quickly. What you're looking at, because we were discussing the numbers of students inbound that live within the neighborhood, the attendance boundary or outside. And we've looked at that as a holistic percentage before. What these charts show for the schools that we've been talking about, of the previous college prep and Paideia schools, is a breakdown of the students that are enrolled at that school. For example, at Roberts, this is on the right, you see the attendance boundary within where they live. So it's what we call a school of residence, right? So there are 7 students attending Roberts Academy, but they live within the Cheviot's attendance boundary. There are 4 within the Cairns attendance boundary. So it gives us a visual or an understanding as to where the students live that are attending that are outside of their attendance boundary currently, due to the part of the magnet process.
I appreciate that. We used to do those as dots.
Yes. We now have the information.
So what does it mean, unspecified public high school?
So there are two schools that fall into that category, Roberts being one, where because they have a 7th and 8th grade, the students in 7th and 8th grade are technically considered junior high school students. And when you when you matriculate to high school, you no longer have a school of residence as an elementary student. So they fall into an odd area. As soon as they go to a 9th grade, they'll be reassigned a school of residence based on their neighborhood they live in. But during that 7th and 8th grade period, they're in kind of a limbo status for just this designation of tracking their school of residence versus the school they attend, because technically they're not elementary students, but they're attending a primarily elementary building through a K through 8. And basically you have the breakdown for every school that was on the list for the initial 7, the magnet, or the college preps, and the former Paideas. So those are all available in these charts. And then one final, we took a look at Roberts. Just wanted to be able to give you this visual that kind of puts together what those charts are showing. The red dots represent Roberts. And of course, Roberts is very close to Reese Price. So the blue boundaries represent the attendance boundaries for all the surrounding areas. You can see the red scattered throughout those to see where those students are coming from. You can see where Roberts does not have an attendance boundary currently, it's fairly well spread out. Even in those schools that are magnets but have an attendance boundary, for example, Covedale, you can see that their students are largely within their attendance boundaries. And that's what those charts will also show if you dig into it a little bit, is that those schools that have it, the vast majority will be from within their attendance boundaries. Roberts and Woodford are the two, because they do not have attendance boundaries, you'll see that their population is very well dispersed.
Yeah.
So when we look at the Montessori as well, I know we went to great length and money to buy Mother Mercy so that there would be an appropriate Montessori high school on the west side. And then, of course, for whatever reason, we didn't touch our enrollment process, even though the board thought we had. And that was 2 years ago. So when you look at the Montessoris, some Montessoris are supposed to be pulling from the west side, and some of the Montessori, and that's true for the elementary Montessoris, as well as the high school Montessori. Are we currently doing what we asked and suggested and paid for regarding the enrollment process of Montessoris? And if we don't know that, I think we need to find out, because we found out last year we weren't. And so kind of, that would be great. And some of these things are like, Roberts are citywide draws, right? And some of them are just east-west.
I've always heard that Roberts was a West Side magnet that got pulled, and it looks like from your map the majority of the students are being pulled, but you're saying it doesn't have a boundary. So is it a citywide? Is it considered a citywide magnet or a West Side magnet?
No, it's considered a West Side.
Okay.
Sorry, by not having an attendance boundary, I mean it does not have a defined attendance boundary like some of the other schools. You can see the outlines in blue, where it's a much more defined attendance boundary. But they do still have the regional designation between east and west. And you can see Roberts does primarily pull from the west, as you see here. Woodford, I do have it here just handy. As you can see, though it is an east designation, does show a case where it is not necessarily as isolated to the east side. It does have a more dispersed.
So it has a regional designation, but not a neighborhood designation.
Correct. It's the close. We call them attendance boundaries versus neighborhoods, since our neighborhood and attendance boundaries don't necessarily align.
Yeah.
Is it possible that there's special programming at Woodford that's drawing some of those kids, because I believe they have at least a hearing impaired unit, if not something else?
Yeah, in many of the cases there could be. This again is the initial analysis.
Sure, absolutely.
The program audit is ongoing, and that's the next layer that's critical to this.
Right.
Like this is the preliminary data without that program analysis that's being completed as we speak, which will play a part.
Woman Jones,
And Jeremy did early research on that, where we were trying to figure out, if you'll recall, that what staff members' kids are going to the school, and that kind of colored the results, as well as specialized programming. So once you eliminate that, that's when in those two items, then you start to really see what the draw is. But I think those international, as I call them, schools probably almost have to be citywide. When you look at our immigrant and refugee populations, it's kind of, and we have a couple on the east side, a couple on the west side, and one in the central corridor with Aiken. But those almost, I would think, almost have to be citywide because of the nature of the student and the background.
So I just want to remind everybody that this is really just this is laying our foundation, because ultimately we can look at how transportation impacts the boundaries, like what is it actually costing us to transport students? What is our staff looking like? How far is our staff going? Jeremy was able to give us a graph before where the staff at the school, where were they taking their students? Were they driving past 5 schools in order to take their students to school? I mean, this is just the groundwork. So you guys are right on time to the fun, because we're laying the foundation. Jeremy, is this for you?
I think, if we're ready to go to number 2, it's a pretty easy update.
Does anyone have any other questions about this? Okay. So, yes, Jeremy, let's move on to 1 mile walk distance for elementary schools.
Okay, so you've been provided a new updated school profile packet. I did not bring enough for everyone, I'm sorry, but it is available online, or it will be shortly. All of the school profiles have been updated for the mapping information contained for each school. You'll see now, in addition to the blue outline, which shows the attendance boundary, the white dash lines, which show the neighborhood boundaries, we also have now a green outline around each of the locations, which designates its walking boundary. That is the walking distance that's allowed for each of those schools.
Can you pull one up so that they can see what we're talking about?
Certainly.
That way you all will know this. Jeremy is the man with these maps, so we want you guys to see the magic.
Dots.
We only need about 6 months to read through it.
Sorry.
Of course, to understand it, but it just looks so nice.
It does look nice.
And at the heart of this is the issue of committing to neighborhood and actually having neighborhood schools instead of schools that were drawn arbitrarily. When you were allowed to kind of do that, now you can't even do that based on.
And just while
things.
While Jeremy's pulling this up too, we're also going to be working on our work plan for this committee with you all here as well, because we there's a lot to do, but we are staying focused on elementary school boundaries and looking at that. And then the other thing that we talked about phases and doing this work in phases, so that while we're talking about the west side for maybe the next few meetings, people from the east side don't have to necessarily come unless they're just interested, because we will be focusing on, what did we call them? Not regions.
We call them those east, west, and central corridors.
Corridors. So we're going to do that so that people can find out what we're talking about and then focus their attention, rather than we'll be just all over. I guess we're starting with the west corridor.
It looks like we're doing everything.
Like we're doing that. So.
Kind of doing it all.
Jeremy says, I don't have to do the third. I'll go back.
It's gotten much easier.
Yeah. So it's on you.
So essentially, like I said, that's the update in terms of the walking boundaries now available on each of these. Minus there are about 5 schools that we still have GIS data to plot for, the newest schools, as well as some that have not traditionally had those kind of boundaries really necessary or defined for it. So there you will see, I think there's 4 or 5 left that we still have to add, but beyond that, you'll see for the other 60 that every school with a designated walking boundary currently has it marked in the new profiles that are available.
And so can you make that just a little bit bigger, Jeremy? I want to...
The map itself.
The map, yes, ma'am. I want to go just for those people that have not seen this before, excuse me, the blue is
Sorry.
That's okay. The blue is the neighborhood boundary, correct?
The attendance boundary.
Okay, so can you explain that map so that people can understand what we're looking at?
Yep, so the blue outline is the attendance boundary for the school. The green outline is the walking boundary. And then what you see in the white dashed lines, those are the neighborhood boundaries as defined by the city, recognizing those community authorities. So as you can see, a lot of the schools cross over multiple neighborhood boundaries, but that's what those lines designate. And then, of course, you can see the school names are largely represented wherever the schools are, either by high school
So you can see why we're pretty proud of these maps in Jeremy, because they're cool on us a lot. And then the walking distance, what was the miles? Was it just one?
Yeah, it's 1 mile.
1 mile.
The maximum walking distance. So it's a 2 miles in Turtle Block from the school. So it's 1 mile from the school all the way around.
That's the
I
green.
said that right?
That's
Correct.
within the green.
Yes.
Yeah, on that, and one of the reasons it's 1 mile is that is a transportation delineation, and this year we added that we made the high school piece be 1 mile. So PK, it's one of the many things that changed that helped make this much more difficult on transportation besides the market itself. But I think that 1 mile is a very crucial thing if you then were able to superimpose, if you could, superimpose everybody's 1 mile. I mean, if you actually had a whole district-wide map, sorry, Jeremy, district-wide map, and see where that overlap and where all that kind of thing happens, because it'd be a great marketing piece, if nothing else, where you think in terms of your neighborhood schools being walking schools.
I can certainly follow up and send that to the committee members pretty quickly, and then have it available for our meeting next time for the public.
Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Just say one more time what you're asking for Phyllis.
If we had a whole district map and we did the 1 mile walking distance for the neighborhood schools, all of them that are neighborhood schools and perhaps some that will become technically neighborhood schools again, that would be interesting to have that superimposed so that we see where the overlap is, how close we are, if we're trying to match even neighborhood boundaries eventually, if that's what we decide to do. I think that would be important. And I think it would be important, too, to have a much better geographic understanding of what magnets or Montessori's are pulling. That would be interesting to look, because I just think this is something that, some things get done and some things don't get done. And the more comprehensive we can be, I think the clearer it will be for all of us.
Is that part of the audit, Jeremy, that you all are doing, like the program audit to find out where the magnet Montessori are pulling from?
So no, I believe the program audit would be more specific to the programming of the school in terms of curriculum or specialty programs and instructional officers and services. More of that data we've been looking at through my efforts in this, and certainly can add as we go along any requests we have.
I think it sounds good. Does anyone have? Yes, ma'am.
I have a random question. What are you using for the neighborhood boundaries? Do you use the Hamilton County Auditor, or do you use the community council boundaries?
The community council boundaries that the city recognizes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Generally, most of all of the options are kind of disputed, so choosing an option.
Yes.
I do have a question. I'm former president of Oakley Community Council, and I was co-chair of the Oakley Neighborhood School Committee a few years ago. For a school like Oakley, that their neighborhood school is exceptionally farther away from their community, so neighborhood school is actually in another neighborhood, what would be the best way for families and community members to ask how to champion their needs? Because it seems like you have a great audit going, but I think as part of the audit, there should also be some of the outstanding issues that have been going on in these communities that don't necessarily even have a viable neighborhood school and haven't for many, many years.
It's a really good question.
Because I know for my children, we live in Oakley, we're extremely active, we're 1.4, 1.5 miles away, and it's a busy Edwards Road to walk down. Just having walkable school bus or biking to school is not practical.
What I recall about it was in the meeting that the superintendent was here, and she identified like 7 components of this audit that we could look at. He talked a little bit about that each school has its own sort of unique aura or whatever, and what are they? And so I would think that what you're asking for can be built into this upcoming audit. That what makes it attractive to people, So, but I don't know. I guess I don't know how deep we'll go into the audit, but that's certainly something that strikes me as possible to do.
I appreciate that, because in the past, years ago, Oakley had an issue that when you turn 5 years old, many families moved out because of the designation. That helped spur the opening of Hyde Park School. Oakley families became a predominant, supporter of that. And now, as things have balanced out and there is more families from the actual neighborhood the school is in, Oakley still has a question of how do we keep our kids together in the neighborhood where they live, work, and play.
Yeah, that did come up. We did have
Great.
some level of conversation about that.
We did, and actually, I don't know if my committee members remember, Dr. Ginger Rhodes brought up about how we need to do, beyond this audit, community audit of why are people choosing or not choosing the schools they're going to, and what is it about that school that's not attractive. So I do appreciate that. We did talk about that in the very beginning, and that I think is just exactly what Board Member Jones said, a layer that we're going to add to this, but this is our foundation layer. So don't forget that, because this is good.
Just from a data point, it might be really interesting to see how much that growth has, what has happened over the last 7 years at Hyde Park, how much that has increased the enrollment around that area. Because it's helped our community tremendously.
Yes, ma'am.
I think obviously lobbying, but I would also say visually having this starts to make the case, whether it's, Kyle's interest from the west side, and whether it's about LEAP or Roll Hill or some of those other things, or the IB piece, all that stuff is coming together. And that's what we've unfortunately looked at all of this in a fragmented way. And so this is our opportunity to kind of look at it fully. I mean, I think that's important. And I will say, and I'm going to, since you mentioned Ginger Rhodes, and I think particularly talking in terms of Pleasant Hill Academy, years ago, we, within the board, took on that issue of creating cans, which now needs space. And so we created cans, and when we created cans, we determined that, and we did it, we also determined that the surrounding area for cans would go to neighborhood schools, which are not there. We said Winton Terrace area would have their own school, which they have, which is a higher performing school than Pleasant Hill is. We said that Northside's Chase would be by neighborhood boundaries. We said we wouldn't cut College Hill in half. So and we also, in that same period of time, said we were going to do the addition for Pleasant Ridge. So there are some things that have already been decided that could be done, but then there's also where we have kind of the desert, so to speak, or we don't have coverage, as well as now there's the interest regarding elementaries. We keep hearing people want, and I think we talked about it last time, they want some kind of middle school formation as well. So all this is a facilities piece.
We're hearing a lot of that lately.
Yes, we are.
Yes,
in our engagement sessions.
Yes. So I mean, this is so huge, and all the work that we have ahead of us. There's an awful lot of work that's been done if we come to certain principles.
So I'm going to ask a question. Maybe some other people are thinking about this, but I just tend to ask interesting questions. So how did we get to not having middle school, since you brought that up? Because
she was the only one here.
I mean, we do have some historical. And I remember, although I'm not a part of the CPS, I remember very middle school. Schwab was like a middle school. I mean, that's a long time ago. But what was the discussion around getting rid of and putting the 7th and 8th graders in with the big kids?
The FMP. Real quickly, the FMP was the major force getting rid of junior highs. We
Across the state, though, right?
Well,
FMP stands for what? For people?
Facilities
sorry.
Master Plan.
Yeah.
And yes, it was a commitment about the fact that junior highs were not really being at all successful here in Cincinnati Public. There were behavior issues, there were staffing issues, there were buildings that were in great disarray. So when the previous boards and the community designed the Facilities Master Plan, they went with what research sort of said, which is you have K-8s. Or not, excuse me, the state never said K. We were the leaders on K and pre-K. But they said, it's 1 through 8, and then we have our high schools that are 9 through. Well, the first year I was on the board, the first and second year on the board, we had virtually every elementary community tell us, could you please get rid of the 7th and 8th graders? They are disruptive. They are hurting our preparation with the younger kids. We spend way too much time on discipline. So now you've eliminated the idea of junior high. And so it went from, as the master plan was, K-8 and 9-12. And we've built the whole thing around that. We got rid of that based upon the needs, partly because of the report card, I think, for the elementary success. And when we did, though, as I say all the time, we made a promise that we did not keep. We said when we do this, we will have a way of having separate grades, particularly 7 and 8, maybe in different wings within that building. We would have more transition. We would have more success centers for that transition. We didn't do it. And when we pay for that, and our children and our families pay for that. So that's how it ended. But now, as we look at the facilities, like you've been talking about, we have an opportunity maybe to do more K-8s, as we've talked about once in this committee. And that's why I would like to see the success of K-8s versus K-6s and whatever. So we have that opportunity. We also probably, if we consolidated some schools, we probably have a few buildings that would be available for 6, 7, and 8. I'm a big fan of the whole middle school piece for that transition. So that's how it happened.
Gotcha.
So everybody was doing the right thing. It's just, promises weren't kept.
I think the hearts were in the right place, but if you've ever talked to a 7th or 8th grader or a teacher of one, and they're a little stressed right now. So
Well, they're terribly
stressed right now.
And they're rare birds, too. If you middle school, you are a different kind of teacher.
That is definitely
it's
true.
God's truth. So, and I'm a big supporter of it.
So I've always wanted to know. I know some other people have. I'm not the only person that's been kind of like, how did we get here?
That's how we got here.
And let's go back to the history.
Yeah, but I said it was across the state. I happened to be on a different school board before I came here. It was the same scenario.
Exactly.
So they only had they had one high school, one middle school, and 2 elementaries, right? But through that FMP at that time, I want to say we were literally told, in order to get the money from the state, that's how you had to do it. So they merged the high school, they merged both elementary schools, and then they merged the high school and the middle school together. So I don't think it was just
wasn't a
CPS thing. I think some of the
thing.
issues were different. Some of the challenges were different, but I think the overarching thing had to do with you being able to get the state funding for it. So
a little history. Anyone have any questions?
How many people like the idea of middle schools for any of our kids? Anybody?
I do.
I just think that's a transition year. Those years are transition years. They're not little kids, but they're not high schoolers either. And they just, they are beasts of different brands, I'd say.
And we don't transition well to 7th grade.
Mm-mm.
No.
Mm-mm.
Well, and they don't transition well to 9th grade either.
Right, but if they're let's say going from Montessori to a 7th grade, essentially high school, that can be a very eye-opening experience.
Like nothing good happens between 7th grade.
That's so cool. So, thank you, Board Member Bolton. I appreciate that. So, think we're at our continued discussion of our work plan. So, Board Member Bolton and
Yeah, let's breeze through this because this will be incredibly boring for everybody.
Here are a couple of copies. I'm going to pass them down that way, and then I'm going to pass these this way. So take one. Just so you all know, all of our committees have work plans, which kind of drive their work. It's kind of like setting up goals for the committee to focus on and to stay focused on. So we've done a little bit of work with regard to what our committee is about. That's the organization. I'm going to read that because I'm going to read it. The board ad hoc committee will meet as needed in order to complete its assignment and then be sunset until the next organization meeting necessitates a transition into a new board. The committee will meet at least quarterly to monitor the work plan. The committee meetings will take place in board office here. And any committee member may place items on the committee agenda for discussion. And our charge is to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools. And our charge is also to assess the current state of the boundary lines, engage with the community, and make recommendations to the board. So we will listen to the administration. They are currently doing their audit to lay the foundation for us. Hopefully you all are the first of many to come and give us your input and engage with us with regard to the audit and some recommendations regarding attendance boundaries. And then we will make, as a committee, a recommendation to the board for review, adoption, but I'll turn it to my committee members. We'll figure that part out. Because we will be doing this in tandem with the administration, so I'm assuming it's going to be for recommendation. So, Board Member Bolton, Board Member Jones, community, does anyone have any, we should have our profile audit completed and presented to us in December.
That's from the administration. That's
Yes.
the instructional piece, pretty much. Okay.
Do we need December and January to go over that, or do you think December is enough?
I think
Yes, ma'am.
I like the idea of doing it over a couple of months, maybe even 3 months. And I know time is of the utmost importance. But what I'm thinking about is, and I believe Board Member Bolton had mentioned this, that it's so critical for us to get parents who are involved in particular areas, in particular communities, to try to encourage them to be a part of that discussion. So if we do timelines that sort of map out, or where we're talking about specific geographic areas or schools, that we need to be very targeted at how we involve the people who live in those areas.
Okay.
And so I think that's going to take a little time. I would rather take this part a little slower just so we get that input than to try to rush it through. But I'm open to.
So can I suggest we discuss the school profile audit in December and then take January to maybe discuss it with region, or what do we call them? Quarters.
I think we do need the December and January for actually the community to come in, because there's going to basically be a report virtually for every single school.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
but I think
and it's instructional. But again, I emphasize there are things we have decided and cleared up over time that I don't want to miss another year.
Okay.
And so, I mean, from the standpoint of that, but it doesn't really have that much to do instructionally. You're checking into the authenticity of the programming, and we're worrying about access. Meaning, okay, if this school is this and that school's there and what have you, we want, in a way that we can afford to sustain, we want those schools improved or rewarded. And more importantly, we want access, it's my understanding, to the programming that is being successful. And that starts to get into the geography piece. And that's why there's this discussion of anything about corridors. But I think we need at least 2 months, because there's going to be community concern about the evaluation programmatically of their schools.
I'm
Right.
a little confused. Are we
Okay.
talking about what I'm hearing is December of this year, we're talking about school profile audit. I see that as a very comprehensive process where we need to look at a whole lot of detail.
Mhm.
I'm saying that's going to take at least a couple months.
Absolutely. We're in the same
Then I'm
agreement.
saying, if that audit involves talking about clusters of schools, then we should take the time to include those community folks who are interested, which means we have to reach out and engage them and ask them to come. Which, in my opinion, I think it kind of slows it down a little bit. That's what I'm saying. We got to give ourselves time. And after saying that, we can do this after this, but I'm curious to know how people here
Me
found
too.
out about this. What was your interest in this? Why are you here today? How'd you hear about it? You know, that kind of thing, because I think that that's important for us to know.
Mr.
Yeah.
Roser.
Yeah, as a parent and community member, if I knew that in February you were doing East Corridor
Yes.
or Central Corridor
Yep.
or West Corridor, then I can come out and show up. I wouldn't have to
Yes.
attend all three meetings.
Yes.
Or if I'm here to represent maybe Spencer Center, which draws from all over, I might want to attend those specific meetings.
Yes.
It would
Exactly.
help, and then we could rely on those community councils and neighborhoods to help get that out.
Exactly.
So I completely agree with you, and I hear what you're saying as well. What I'm suggesting is December 2022 school profile audit. It should be completed and presented the whole entire within its entirety. And then January we do the school profile audit for the West. And I said West and / Central because I don't know if it's going to be big. Then February is school profile audit for Central and East. And then if we needed March, do we need March, do you think? Or do you want to just do one?
I would start with the Central, just because, not because I
Okay.
live there, but that's where, and so
That's where
there's
the
another member of the committee live there. But the Central, we've done the most work in over reaching out, whether it's the College of Peace or Northside or Winton Terrace, Winton Hills.
Okay, so January, school profile audit of the Central. February, school profile audit of West.
Or East.
Well, there's only two.
What are the corridors again?
East, West, Central.
East, West, Central.
So
Hey, and I have to interrupt. This is too funny. And I'm trying to say something nice about Metro, which I have not in 4 years.
that's
So
monumental.
take a picture. They had a big celebration, and really. I'm saying something nice about Metro. But they had a picture of their proposed express lanes or lines or whatever they call them, dead on our east-west central.
Well,
It's crazy.
They've heard you enough. You probably threw
Oh
out
yeah, I'm
Moses.
sure that. Yeah,
Gave them
I influenced them a lot. Yeah.
So Miss Phyllis. So January Central, February, let's just go West, and then March East, and April. Those are my board members. We've done some.
That's too far ahead for me.
We will have done some engagements in springtime. What are we suggesting?
Well, the administration is going to present all of the schools at once, is my understanding. So you're going to get
That's
all of
December.
the schools. That's December. And then you have the January, February, March, if you wanted to divide it into the three quarters.
So for April.
Recommendations and implementation.
That's
There you go.
That's what I'm thinking.
I would say recommendations. Because I have another question, and it might some of my members, my colleagues might think this is me being contentious, but it's not. Our charge, I'm seeing this as evolving into a work effort. And my understanding about the ad hoc committee is that we're not doing the work. So I would say recommendations, and we can lay out those recommendations, make those recommendations to administration or whatever. But I want us to stay focused on the fact that we're doing the bigger picture stuff and recommendations follow that.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, but I just will add that this is a little different because the administration is doing the work. They're actually presenting it to the committee where the community is engaging with the work.
Well, can we
in
say,
my mind, the work.
can we just, I'm sorry, can we just say then next steps? Because I'm not convinced that we aren't doing. It feels like we're doing the work. It feels like a strategic initiative to me.
Well,
so
one
and
of
I'm
the,
not, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm saying I'm not. The implementation of what happens doesn't lie with this committee.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
That's why you kind of put a freeze at April. We make the recommendations that we can.
That's my suggestion.
And
Make the
then freeze
recommendations.
at April. It doesn't mean we stop, but it means we might be in another direction because you'd have to get another mission. You'd have to get another charge.
Recommendations and next steps.
So hold on one second. I don't think that comes in April, but I want to hear what.
I was just going to add, I feel like the audit is going to inform the access. So, teams are already starting to walk buildings to kind of get a gauge based on program name against what's actually going on in the building. And so this December report, once you see it, it's going to erupt a whole lot of questions. And we're going to have to take the time, in my opinion, to talk through where we want to go next. So,
and is 1 month long enough to do that?
Well, that's what I was thinking. That's why I said I don't think it comes in April. I think we need to kind of let this work plan sit with what we have. And in all honesty, I think after December, when we get some information from you all, then we need to come back again and look and see where we are, because I don't know if 1 month is good enough. And what happens if someone misses a session, then they need to get the information. I just think it could be driven a little bit longer. So let's stop here unless someone has really big rocks in place that are like, no, I think you should do this. We definitely should be finished by May or June, but I just think we need to let the work drive us a little bit further. Jeremy, I'm anticipating you're going to need the whole meeting. You and administration.
Uninterrupted.
I can take the whole of any meeting.
So we don't know what we don't know at this point, and I think we've got some really great questions, and we've also got some really great agenda items for the next meeting, which we again don't know may spark huge interest and challenges. Does that sound fair?
Our charge is about the elementary boundaries, and the administration's charge that they're working from, that they've given themselves, rightfully so, is an instructional audit, and also, my understanding is a lot of the things that each school offers. And I have a question for you in that, are we talking, when you're talking about programmatic, there aren't that many schools that are, let's say, that have Paideia across the front of them, all right? Are you talking about the authenticity of our high school programming? Probably. Because our high schools, many of them have specific programming. Or are you talking in terms of whether or not that we're still doing the 2020 vision?
It's
Vision
all.
2020.
It's all.
It's everything.
Yes, it is all.
Like is Hughes really STEM, by state standards?
Yes. So that when this information is presented, we can then determine next steps in terms of keeping designations or making other recommendations. And so I don't want to speak prematurely. I just know the audit is for that purpose so that we can streamline our programming. If a school has a designation, that we're honoring that with our the way we enroll as well as the way instruction and programming is implemented in the building. Because the long range plan is that these identifications, it is known not just in history, it is in writing and it is in practice as well.
Truth in lending, if nothing else.
Yeah.
All right. So, does anyone else have any other comments or questions about the work plan piece? Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to discuss this work plan again at the next meeting?
In December, for sure. I don't know. Do we have a November meeting?
I don't think so.
I didn't think we had a November meeting.
With
With the addition,
draft.
yes, as a draft, yes. unless you told me procedurally it needs to be something different.
I do want to say, because I think Carolyn asked how do people find out. I wanted to make sure that I invited Kyle, who is previously a resource coordinator at Roll Hill and is now a very active community person on that side of town, and I thought we were kind of underrepresented on the west side. And so that's why I invited him. And then the two ladies from Community Learning Center Institute, I think we should take the time to find out a little bit what they do, because they're talking in terms of, and they have, that's part of the concept of Community Learning Center. They talk about neighborhood development. They talk about the larger community, as well as talking about families and community involvement. So I did. That's why I invited these two. Besides, at least one of them was at the Green Cincinnati.
We're here because of Eve.
That's it.
Kind of figured
really
that.
Smart. They're really smart. And then we have all these other people that started with us as well for the PRM and.
Tiara, I invited Tiara.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
And that's,
East Westwood
yeah.
represented.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's great. I'm
Yeah.
happy to see, but I have a feeling that the numbers are going to grow.
Oh, big time when
So,
they bring that report.
but we also want to make sure that it's well represented across all
9/10.
spectrums. But again, that then distinguishes, is this really an initiative? Is this a strategic initiative? Is this a board work assignment? What is it? But we can
I think
move along the way you've
I think
recommended.
we have administration here. We're not doing the work. I think we're definitely asking great questions and facilitating an opportunity for the community to influence the work. That's my impression of it. We always disagree on, the
Process.
board doing the work and process. So I just, I like people. So come all. Tell 10 of your friends, bring them on with you, because I think it's this directly and indirectly impacts each one of us. So I'd rather have more voices than not. So are we done with the work plan for now?
Yes, please.
Ms. Davis, it will remain a draft, and then we'll probably finalize it in December when we have a little bit more information from admin. So we're down to final topics for discussion, and we've got other business, past ad hoc items worked on by the district and action taken. Are there any?
I think we could probably summarize into three larger groups at this point, unless there's more specific questions. We initiated the group and really went through a historical perspective shared between board members as well as administration, and looked at the history of how some of our school boundaries have been designated both at the school level, at the regional level, and across the district. We moved from there into looking at a lot of the data analysis of the individual schools from the boundaries, how they overlap the individual neighborhoods in multitude in many cases, which was an action item we took and brought back for analysis, as well as we've looked at how the attendance looks for each of the schools, or the enrollment looks at each of the schools based on specialized units, the staff, students, and what the population of each school is looked up. We have the school profiles, which gives us a visual look now at what the boundaries look like, as well as the demographic and population breakdown of the schools. And then I think the third part is what we're looking at now, and that's really a slightly deeper dive into those things that the committee's identified that potentially could have been changes that have, for whatever reason, not been made or need a deeper analysis so that we can evaluate those initial steps while we're looking at the bigger programs and the audits that we're doing for a bigger look at the entire district as a whole. That was how I would summarize kind of the action items we've done to date, unless there's more specific questions.
Summarizes it for me. Board Member Bowles.
Yeah, I appreciate the summary, and I appreciate the fact this started years ago. And the frustration that I have is that we've taken action on some, let's say PRM and certainly the creation of cans. And I want to emphasize, I do not want to lose another year because we do that all the time. and it's the most frustrating part about being on the board, is I totally trust the administration on implementation, but I would like implementation. And with this new administration, I'm anticipating implementation just by the style of leadership, because we've sat here and worked, whether it was in which committee it was. So I think I'm excited about that action and not losing another year, and also not having to so radically diminish our transportation service to meet the needs that we have. And I'm hearing kind of that hinting that somehow we're going to do something less. And we might have to, but we can't do anything less for our families if we can find another way. And reorganizing the district is something, and philosophically talking about choice. And that's what we have to come up with. So I would hope that, since we're not meeting next month, I would hope that in December, when you all present that in the form of whatever you found out, I think that will be very helpful.
Just since we're all kind of giving a summation, I really think this work is important. We're having people in the community are having small siloed conversations about boundaries, about attendance, about schools of choice, et cetera. And I think it's just responsible for us as this committee to provide space for them to have those conversations formally with informed data and being able to hear it and work in tandem with the administration. So that's why I think this is just a great idea. I do like having some tough conversations for the administration to hear, why are people not choosing the schools? Why are people choosing the schools that they are choosing? And I don't ever want to close schools, because I just that breaks my heart. Schools have a culture that is unique to them, but also in the post-pandemic era, we have to look at how we do business. And it breaks my heart that transportation is termed a debacle by me. So we have to do some things different, financially, ethically, and I think it starts with providing space like this. So I don't think we're doing the work. I think we're helping to inform the administration of what the community wants. So that's where I'll stay. Does anyone have any?
Question. We have questions.
Yes, ma'am. Question?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
One big question that I've always had, and we're working on this at Spencer LSDMC, is maybe in addition to why they choose, maybe why they leave.
Exactly.
A lot of times it's not based upon that they've moved, or family has gotten a job, or they're housing insecure, but it's a very conscious decision. I'm leaving this school for another school, and in our school in particular, we have a very high rate of that.
That's one of the elements as part of the audit that we asked about.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that was presented to us as what they would look at.
But it would be neat to see it from a parent perspective.
Yes,
of why
absolutely.
that choice was made.
Yeah.
That's easily taken care of at the front office when people request records at Roberts. I know our staff in the front office, unless it comes over in the summertime, but we are blessed at Roberts to have a family welcome center, and the director of the welcome center makes phone calls to parents who have left, and he has a conversation like, what is it? And Roberts, I believe, has if not the lowest, but one of the lowest mobility rates within the district, and families don't leave. We're very fortunate. Roberts is very fortunate. I'm no longer there. But it's just a simple phone call. And then the relationships that happens within the school. But most often they move out of district, move out of the state. So anyway, it's pretty easily rectified.
I agree.
Well, it's a functioning, highly functioning community learning center that can be done.
I just whispered that. I was like, it's a big CLCI.
And I would also argue, though, to that same point, like, physical space becomes a part of that. Like, there literally can't be a welcome center at PRM. The person who's in the role of even bringing Montessori students in is in a hallway. Like, there is no space.
Hey, we love PRM, and we love what your resource coordinator has done over the years. Spencer Center just got one last week, so Good clean.
And to say that PRM, you did put money towards an addition, but there's actually no movement on it at all. I mean, there's no building happening. There's no set plan, and there's dollars, but even that isn't a whole.
And now it's a third more expensive because we have
If
no
not more than that.
implementations. And it's not, and it's not this administration, it's the
For
previous.
sure.
It's a lost year during the interim. A question.
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of in the same question of where families are going to school and where they're choosing and why. It can also be a very positive story. A couple of years ago, we're at Mount Washington Elementary, and we were able to get data from CPS about where families who live in Mount Washington are going to school, and overwhelmingly, they were choosing Cincinnati Public Schools, which wasn't necessarily the neighborhood narrative. The neighborhood narrative was, private schools, Catholic schools, that's where they're all going. But then we were able to pull the data, and it was like 85% of families in Mount Washington were choosing some Cincinnati Public School option. So it's, once you know that data and understand it, it's an incredible marketing tool to say, CPS, this is what people are choosing. And so it can go either way. But I think having that information is really critical.
I agree with you. I think data is, well, I'm a researcher, so I'm going to tell you the glasses always half full, but someone else could come back and say the glasses half empty. And but we need the data. We have to be able to talk about the data.
At least you know it.
Well informed.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious about the process of this audit and how it's being assessed and how frequent going forward that's going to take place and what kind of community input and shaping the audit going forward will happen.
And we can take that question down in terms of the next steps, but the audit is being conducted through our curriculum and instruction office.
Okay.
And so teams of our curriculum members are going out, as I said, to assess the name. And I mean, maybe this is a follow-up that we bring back the indicators. I know someone referenced them. I wish I knew them off the top of my head.
I have them written
Not
down.
on the curriculum side, but this is facilitated by our chief academic officer and our chief of schools. But they are using their team members to assess the name, designation, and the actual programming that happens in. I think one of the comments I made earlier about how streamlining schools' academic focus, whatever it happens to be, whether it's IB or advanced placement, and mind you, I'm pulling out these names because this is what's familiar to me. It may not necessarily be what's in our schools, but it is a means of us being able to attract as well as continuity. What if we could have IB at the elementary level and then have some type of continuity where a student is able to continue to select from IB at the secondary level? So the process is intentional. It is, again, through our curriculum and instruction team members, and they have calibrated so that their lens are pretty much aligned in a way that as they come back and debrief with the data, what is going to be presented will be presented in a way that, much like you're talking about data and you're talking about data, is going to inform us of what our next steps are or generate questions to make sure that we're aligned in what our next steps are going to be. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Could I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
This is my point I like to always make. The idea of having a K-12 IB program on the west side was invented by the Community Learning Center Institute. They were the ones saying it. Part of it arose in part because some of the kids that were finished with Roberts had some misgivings about going to the next school that there would be. But more importantly, they turned to, and it's around the country. It's not like they invented it specifically for us, but they read about it and they shared it with the previous superintendent. And the previous superintendent thought that that would be very good for the west side, particularly, especially our international population and what have you. And then the idea is then in the corridor piece, if you've got something on the west side, then you have to have some, infrastructure on the west side, which is part of the reasoning of the access piece. But we're really thrilled that the current administration is pursuing the IB piece. But it's an idea from the community.
So we will put that on the agenda for next month to kind of go through the process and have that explained thoroughly with the indicators and how they got through that, just so that we're going to get the results, but maybe understanding the process too. We'll put that on for the next month. So,
do we have an answer for the PRM folks about when this planning and building and whatever is happening? Do we know that, or can we get back to them?
So,
Yeah, we can certainly look into it and get back to you with some information.
can we put that on the agenda, Ms. Phyllis, for a response to? Well, no, you wouldn't want it from this committee because it's going to be the next board meeting. We're not meeting until December, but the next board meeting is November 7th.
It could be an inquiry.
Yeah.
Inquiry update, that would be good.
One of the three of us will ask that question.
And just so I'm clear, this is PRM's question is about
when will their expansion start? They got the money, but
the
not
actual building.
Okay, very good. And I had it written a little bit differently, but I wanted to make sure it was the same as
Appreciate
my note
it.
here. So.
Does anyone else have any more questions or comments for the good of the great of the whatever that's it.
Golf
Good of the
Manor.
great or
Good
good
of
of
the
the
great.
Golf Manor.
So,
You
go.
okay?
I was
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So I do want to, before I adjourn our meeting, I want to say a special thank you to Ms. Dr. Davis because she is leaving. Today is her
Leaving.
last day with the district.
And you chose to spend it with us.
I don't blame her. I would too.
That's how I feel about you.
Okay. And so thank you so much for your
Appreciate it.
service. We will miss you. We'll have to send you some special CPS gear that you can brag with down there. Like, hey, I got some CPS stuff. And I
Well,
do
it was
think,
college day or week, so that's
yes, yes. Do we have any hearing of the public, Rob? Okay, I know everybody wants to go. Okay, so listen.
No, I'm talking about the hearing. They're not there.
Oh, okay, I got you. So having no other business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. We don't have a date for this.